Welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our presentation on strategies to deal with the waiting game. My name is Michelle Zepeda, and I'm the program coordinator at Waterford Place Cancer Resource Center. So Waterford Place provides programs and services free of charge for anyone impacted by a cancer diagnosis that support whole person care. So I am pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening. We have Jan Litvene. Um, Jan is a licensed clinical social worker that generously volunteers her time to assist with multiple programs here at Waterford Place. So in the past, she has done many things such as leading support groups, lead educational presentations, and she also offers counseling to anybody here at Waterford Place. So she has extensive experience working within the realm of illness from providing counseling at her private practice as well. So there will be information at the end if anyone is interested about that. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Jan now so we can get this presentation started.
Well, welcome. I'm glad you both are here, and the information that we're going to talk about is hopefully going to be helpful to you and whoever else may hear the recording. And since the PowerPoint isn't working as well as we hoped, I'm just going to have to tell Michelle, like, next slide. So actually, this is a quote that I've always liked. It's called, "There is always a before and an after. My advice, travel light. Choose only what you need to get you through." And the quote's by Alice Hoffman, who wrote a book called Survival Lessons. She's also written 20 or 30 books of fiction, maybe not that many, but for adults and for teens. She also ended up getting breast cancer later on in her life and wrote Survival Lessons. And we can talk more about that later, so we can go on. So I did this presentation once before, and it came about through a variety of ways, but mainly I started thinking about people have to wait all the time. I mean, we wait for good things to happen, for difficult things, and I thought I just would like to figure it out. Like, not only what is waiting, but what can people do, and what influences our responses, and what happens to our bodies when you wait for something. And also, so the body has to do with our thoughts, our reactions, the energy, what goes on in our hearts. And the thing that came up to me about waiting is that it has something to do with time. And it's usually some waiting has to do with a specific event that either happened or will be happening. So it has to do with just what can you do before, during, and after a medical experience. And that can relate anything from a certain test to an anniversary reaction of a date, or because there's different feelings that go on with each of those, which we'll talk about. And that, at least what I wrote, is that it's really important just to be able to calm yourself, try to manage your fears and manage your negative thoughts, because those will happen. And then I wrote the things, COVID-19 happened a year ago, which actually was a year ago today that I closed my office. So I know that this last year has been a challenge for many people, including those with illnesses and those who love them. So we can go to the next slide. The first part of the presentation really just has to do with, it's kind of a background into one way I see illness, and it's not the only thing, but there's no doubt that it's stressful, can be painful, can be a struggle. It can create stigma. There's losses. Sometimes it comes about just because of something genetically has been triggered off, and sometimes it could be in the environment. But for everyone, illness has an end, and it could be a chronic illness that you live with all your life to the end. It could be the end of a time when you don't test positive in terms of COVID. But, illness usually does change how you see the world. The flu may not do it, but, through a chronic illness, an acute illness, people's lives change. And the question is how to adapt to that. And we go to the next slide. Part of this came about because I've always been interested in illnesses and the effect on the individual and the family and the spirit. So I did some advanced training in therapy with people with medical illnesses. And so I learned a lot. Some I knew and some I didn't. But one thing it says is that when you do have a chronic illness, people get scared and they fear they're going to lose control, or in some ways they have. People fear losing the image of themselves, or people get scared of becoming dependent, of stigma, that they're going to be left, that if they get too mad, that either it'll be overwhelming or you'll be alienating people, and fear of isolation. And people get scared of dying because our brains work like, how do you know that you're not going to? Or, people can get primed. And it's really important to know that we have rational parts of our brain and things that aren't so rational. So while on some level that what you believe isn't true or maybe inflated in some ways, it's all very scary. So we can go on. So one thing to just remember is life is not a steady state. One thing to know is that our brains have many functions. They encode information all the time, so that consciously we're not even aware of some of our body reactions. The other thing is that if you look back in terms of development of people, some of the first development, if you go back, hundreds of millions years ago, there was really, there were things in the world, or even before people, animals, there were things that you needed to fear, and that our body will react at that because it has a wish to survive. The other thing is that we carry both the negative and positive experiences in our body, but we remember the negative more, which is related to a fear response. And that another thing, people are very different, and I'm sure everyone knows that, but so no one reacts the same way to even the same kind of cancer, if your mother and your sister all got breast cancer, you're going to have a different experience even knowing that than someone, if there's a family that it never happens and it seems very manageable. So people are all very different. But while we have our unique history and our responses, there are commonalities. People love, they're connected in some way with families, they have their strengths, their vulnerabilities, and they want to have their lives and go forward. But illness does bring out the vulnerabilities, but it also brings out the resiliency, and both are important to have. So we can go on. So one question is like, how do you persevere? How do you accept what's going on? And I think one thing to think of is that while we want patience, optimism, it's sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, and that illness doesn't happen in a vacuum. That people have more than one illness at times. People also may have some of you may be in a sandwich generation where you have a generation above that might have need and illnesses. Some of you have kids with special needs or medical illness. So that there's a lot going on. And the other thing is that life doesn't stop moving just when we get ill. So the only, yeah, and the only thing that can actually stop moving is kind of you at times. And sometimes that's because there's not other choice. Or sometimes people realize that they can't keep moving at the rate that they are. And that, the last thing is that if stress is there, like what can you do to change your response? So, and that chronic illness really has to do with, for some people, it's really a loss of a bodily control. Some people develop neuropathy or lymphedema, or they don't feel like themselves, or some of the treatment causes hair and eyebrows and eyelashes to fall out, or there's a lot of changes in sexuality that sometimes don't get talked about, but which really affects our feeling about ourselves and people we come in contact with. The other thing is illnesses have to do with visible or invisible, what's invisible. A lot of people who have chronic fatigue or lupus, when they don't have flare-ups, they look like they're not sick, some of them. And so the whole idea, or if people, how do people actually know how you feel on the inside? So it just gets difficult. And there are losses. Some people can't work for periods of time. Some people feel more financially vulnerable. The fact that a lot of people have lost jobs during COVID increased people's feeling vulnerable. And so there's always going on something more than an illness. No one, develops or gets diagnosed with cancer because there could be marital problems or family problems, financial problems. Not everyone has great insurance, medical care, it's a lot of money. People can only be on short disability a period of time, and lots of people don't have benefits. So it's just, there are ways people deal with what's going on, but I don't think it's great to deny them. And the other thing is usually the person who's going through it knows it, and people outside of it may clearly don't have an idea of the body sense that people with cancer might have, as much as they try, unless they've experienced it in some fashion. But it is important just to see what's the best way to continue and go on. So if you look at what helps people get through illness, because bottom line is people do not have enough energy usually, at least unless it's hyper, to really manage what they need to. So it is really important to think, what's the best way to get through it? And later on, we're going to talk about scan anxiety, and it gets called other things too, but on the slide, it just says you need what helps, to have some knowledge about the illness, be able to work with others, kind of have a set of beliefs, have some support, ability to plan and prioritize time, because if you can't do this, it's you're caught between unrealistic expectations of what you used to be able to do and what you can do now. To move through transitions, remember that people are always more than their illness, and that some of this we already said, but like pressure doesn't stop when an illness happens. But then it's things like find a way to stop feeling exhausted or helpless, and recognize how are you going to figure your own needs and maybe family needs. How are you going to rest? How are you going to cope? How do you create energy and hope? And spirituality can get defined in a lot of ways, but for many people at times, it creates meaning and purpose. And however people get it, it helps if there's meaning and purpose. And there's creativity. And then I'll talk more later on about the idea of a language that kind of fits your spirit. So medical illness and disability can strike any family. What's significant is when it happens, the form it takes, the intensity, and the duration. You know, if a child dies at 10 due to a illness, you know, kids aren't supposed to die at 10, at least in the world as we know it. If someone dies at 80 and they've had illness, that people can die of many things when they're 80, you know. And the other thing is, how long does it last? And how hard is it? Like, is pain associated with it? You know, some families are very good at an illness that lasts 3 months. They want to go and do and fix. Sometimes when illnesses last longer, you know, everybody, it's hard. People wear out. And we live longer now. So we can be saved more at times so that people cope longer periods of time with chronic illnesses. And with a chronic, you have to live with some unknowns with a chronic illness. But what's really important is that lots of people find meaning, have their lives, try to reduce their fears. And while, you know, a world can be turned upside down, for many people, they just find ways to create meaning. And I think Waterford, for the few years that it was there and before COVID, really helped people create meaning. And I think it still does. But it was a place that people could go in person if they were well enough. And there could be groups that could teach some of the things that, you know, I'm talking about, that, you know, helping others group, though I forget the name of it, was a way of giving back. That there were always little surprises that would show up when you walked in Waterford Place. So whether it was crocheted port covers or hats or cards from kids around the neighborhood for Christmas. So it kind of, you know, I think was it a touching point for many people, and it got to know people at the point of active treatment. And then people didn't, especially some people left, but many people stayed for long periods of time and just took a Tai Chi class or did other things. So we can go on. I'm going to get tearful saying that, because it's part of all the COVID, how alone we are. So just about, we have our vulnerabilities and our strengths. So the most important thing is that you can show compassion, caring, and love to others and get it. So we can move on. Okay. When people feel vulnerable, they may not everyone feels like a warrior all at one time, but and a need immediately when people feel vulnerable, they feel more helpless or wondering if they're going to be rejected or kind of worthless. And it's not even that we're like trying to find it, but the idea of uh, people like blame themselves when, or like, why am I feeling like that? When in actuality, some of it is just a biological response. Some of it comes out of fear that's wired. And the question is, what's the best thing you can do to help with feelings like that? And we'll talk about that. So we can, yeah. So basically, one of the main things to think about is what can you do to improve your health? If what you can do to maintain your health and what you can do to restore your health. And it really is like, there are questions to ask yourself, like whether it's taking yoga on an ongoing basis or whether it's go to your doctor's appointment or whether it's following up or getting a second opinion. But it's all about there are things you do with your body physically, mentally, how you talk to yourself, and spiritually, which has to do, I think, a lot with I was going to say feeding the spirit, but it's important to think about this because not everybody, at the beginning, people don't even really have a great understanding of what's going on. So we can go ahead, Michelle. So we're on to the waiting part. So as I was thinking like, what is the waiting about? I was going like, we wait alone or with other people. Sometimes we wait in different places. A car, at home, a waiting room, or an office, at an event, or at work, that everywhere we wait has to do with comfort, discomfort, safety, and openness, and includes how others are receptive to us. And later on, I think it's maybe after this slide, I talk about, I just went to the cancer center at Rush and took a walk and tried to figure out like what did I see and what did I notice? So, and the other thing it says that sometimes when we wait, it is a specific thing, sometimes it's unknown. So you have different kinds of waiting, but it's also like sometimes you wait for something to be seen visually. A telephone call, you might hear it through you know uh, through our ears, or or during an appointment, you're a place and you hear some news. So we can go ahead. Okay, so then that our feelings and our responses change with where we are, how you process them. Like, are you going for a test? Are you going for a long procedure? Is it the first day of chemo or the last day, if you're doing that, or radiation? So, and it depends if you've done some of this before, that sometimes you carry with you a response like, when like the nurses are very nice where I go to get treatment, or it could be last time I got really nauseous, and then then you're worried about getting nauseous again. But that time is very different. It seems like it can be very slow waiting for something, or it can be very speeded up, like because maybe you're getting too much information at one time. And then hope is important, like what's realistic to hope for. And unrealistic hope helps us go forward too. And unrealistic hope, maybe we can talk about at the end, but it at least my meaning is that sometimes odds aren't very good with certain illnesses, but it doesn't mean like you're not going to be the one who beats odds, and hope changes through a course of an illness, and yeah, and that I started thinking about, okay, like people wait for graduation, sometimes, usually good. People wait to go to Disneyland. Uh, so, some people don't want to go. I've never gone to Disneyland. Or they have to wait for chemotherapy, So actually, one thing is some waiting has to do with a feeling of being threatened. So we can move to the next slide. So this kind of says the same thing, but it's different, like graduation. Yeah, so we can go on. Okay, so you're waiting to get a diagnosis. Your body might be reacting. People don't call you back. People want to stop feeling nauseous for chemo to be over, especially when there weren't that many medicines to treat nausea. That it could really change how you felt. And people wait for an anniversary date of a specific event, like the date you got diagnosed or when treatment started. And that some waits are just boring. And sometimes the longer you wait is more intense. So we can go on to the next one. This slide just talks about people can feel impatient or frustrated, get angry or anxious, or feel relief or grateful. But I think it's that it's easy to get impatient at times or zone out or get frustrated if you can't get all the answers you want at one time. And anger, if you're irritable, people can get more irritable at people around them who may be trying to help, but it may not be the right fit for the moment. And that with anxiety, people's thoughts go over and over in their head, or they don't sleep, or they just know they startle. And they can the other thing is anxiety grows at times just because it increases in our thoughts. There may not be any immediate danger. We'll go on to the next one. Okay, so I went to visit Rush-Copley's cancer outpatient center. So I went because I was doing these things like what could people do to hold on to during treatment, or what would happen? So I went to the cancer center, and I went twice actually. So the first time I noticed like the chair fabric, pictures, the light, how much noise, were there people? I noticed there was a fireplace. But really what I was looking for is I wanted to see if there were like specific examples that I could tell people I worked with, like ways to just get grounded and centered. So it's interesting. I went twice, and the first time I was just like figuring out how people could try using breath work through windows or frames. And I was looking at different sorts of things. And at least what I saw at that time was what I saw at that time was it's very quiet, which is different than if people walked in during COVID when there's very little light. It's very different. And if people have been in treatment during this time, there's even hospitals being much different. And actually, when I went, there was a older gentleman there who apparently was part of Waterford Place. And what he did, like every Tuesday, is he went he said hello to everybody in the entire hospital and welcomed people. And he's a cancer survivor and felt like at this time he really wanted to help people feel more comfortable. So we can go on. So this just talks about if you feel vulnerable and you don't have much power, you worry more. And we'll go on so we can talk about the scans. And let's go to the next slide. Okay. So there is something called scan anxiety. So scan anxiety is a word that people have talked about for a long time, but people just don't have scans anymore. Some people have blood tests, well, they did all along, blood tests for markers or other things, but it means a test. Sometimes, a scan takes a period of time. It might be a different time than other kinds of treatment, but at least when people started studying this is that people can develop PTSD symptoms after treatment. So when you have to have a scan, your brain remembers like the first time you got sick. And that, this just says people get nervous during that time. But like during treatment, people worry about if the treatment's worried. After remission, they worry if it's going to come back. So it's like an emotional roulette. People spin patients around for days or even weeks because you don't always get the answer to a test. But what happens is you get the result from the scan. And if it seems that it's fine, some people feel like they can breathe for a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. And we can go to the next slide too. So when the I can't say her middle name, Schlessel, Hartfum. She's written a few books. She's a doctor who got cancer and wrote a lot about, she was a younger mom at the time and just wrote a lot about, what it meant being a physician and having cancer, and other people have done that too. But what she said is that like she found relief in a triad of expectations. Like you could expect any result, you could expect the results to help, and you could expect to accept and deal with whatever results you get. So in other words, like accept the uncertainty and focus on the benefit of test results. So it's like, and then she said, that led me to an insight about hope that helped my waiting. More than I hoped for good news, I hope for accurate news. And people hope for all kinds of things, but some people are hoping for good news, but I think accurate news is pretty important too. So we can go on. This is some information from James, Randolph, Hillard, but it kind of has to do with the people just get anxious and worried. It says scan anxiety is rational because of the results of a scan can literally be a matter of life or death. It's irrational because people feel it regardless of the actual probability of bad results. And it's kind of universal with people who get scared. And he says, at least in his experience, he didn't see that it necessarily got any better and through time. And other people would disagree with that, that it's more like if you can learn some ways to manage it that work and fit your body, maybe it can be easier to have scans. Okay. So we'll go to the next slide. And we'll go on to the next slide. You can, yeah, we'll go on to the next one. So this one we'll do. So with responses and choices, it's like, so what can you do? So it's like, can you change the situation, alter it, avoid it? Can you change your reaction? So let's go to the next slide so I can tell you some things that might help. So it talks about if you're worried about a scan or a test, it says, so what can you do? It's like you get the earliest appointment, maybe. Good. That's for the 8 a.m. appointment. Or and also make an emergency plan. Like a friend of mine needed like brain surgery a couple weeks ago, and the doctor couldn't get out of the driveway, so it had to be rescheduled because when we had that big snowstorm. But it's like to ask the questions ahead of time, like when would the results be available? You can see if you want someone to go with you or do something after, to identify people who you feel actually get it, to do what you can to sleep or read or drink liquids if they fit with what you need to do. Actually, some people check with their doctor about medications that might help, like an anti-nausea medicine, if that might be a side effect. And the other thing is that most of you have seen long lists of coping strategies, which not all of them fit everyone, and many of them work well. So we can go ahead. Okay, so to manage anxiety and worry, one thing to do is to set limits how much you worry and where. So it's more like some people would decide to worry for a half hour between 4:30 and 5 every day, and then try to not thinking you've written out your worries, do them later. You can think about doing them visually, like put them in different boxes. You can try to figure out what worries do you have now, like for today or tomorrow, what worries are like middle worries and other ones. The next one says learn about breath work, which is one way of working to regulate your body and your body experiences. The next is to do something with your thinking that can be reframed. And the other thing is that it's really just learning how to manage anxious or negative thoughts. So there's some people will just distract themselves. They'll do coloring books. They'll do a crossword puzzle. There's something called grounding, because a lot of times when people get worried, all the thoughts are in their head and they can't really feel the ground. So grounding really has to do, can I feel the earth? Can I stand up straighter? Can I remember that this is now and not all the worst things in my head? So, and then I had to put exercise or see if telling others will help. And gratitude is one thing people write about a lot, like to do 3 gratitudes, 3 things you're grateful for each day. But they really do have to be specific. It's not like, I'm grateful I have food. It's like, I'm grateful that the turkey sandwich tasted really good, or, it helps if gratitudes are specific. Like, I'm grateful when I said this prayer, it lifted a worry, you know. So it's good to try to be specific, and we can go on. The next 2 slides, one's on pace and one's on planning, and it has to do with when people aren't well, though some of you might, I don't know, some people are much better than they have been, but it's like, how do you use your energy and to recognize the difference between tired and exhausted. People who have chronic fatigue and stuff and other illnesses and people with cancer, it's like a lot of times with certain cancer treatments, exhausted, it depends how you use it, but it's more like exhausted is more like you got hit by a bus, it's, and then it's that kind of thing. And sometimes when people get exhausted from cancer treatment, it's like they have X amount of energy And when it's done, it's done. And then they need a bed within like 4 seconds. So we, just like there's some other helpful things, but we can go on. And then there's the idea of a plan. We can go to the next one. These are, some people say they want to set some goals, but these are, if you do want to set goals, it can be, make sure it's like believable, achievable, specific. Can you measure it? Is it relevant to what you want and timely? So it's really more, if you do set a goal, it's important to see how you're going to get it done. So we can go on. We're going to go through these fast because I want to leave some time for questions. But one is like, what do you need in a boat when there's a storm? And part of this comes from a book. It's called The Cancer Survivor's Companion. But there's some nice stories, and it's good for like the first year or even after, because it's like, what do you do with your feelings? So we can go ahead. You could read it later, or email me if you have a question. The same thing, it's how do you find your way out of the woods when you're lost? We can go on. This is like, what do you pack in your suitcase when you're moving destination? But some of it is like, people have baggage or suitcase, but some of it is we have a lot of negative experience, and what are you willing to leave behind? Like, you don't, it really goes, you don't have to carry more than's necessary. We'll go to the next one. Some people will make a toolbox. So a toolbox has, like, if you get really upset, what can you do? Like where to find things, or how you can put memories or music or cards or anything that would help you feel better. And we'll go ahead to the next one. This is chart, we're going to go through this. It's just about cognitive behavioral therapy, but I'd rather go on to some other things. So I think there's 3 slides. Yeah. Yep, we can keep going. But I think this one is important. Like, you need to challenge thoughts that you're having. Like, what are the thoughts? When do I have to pen them? What can I do? How does my body feel? Kind of just what you can do. The cognitive distortions are what everyone does. It's the things like magnification or predicting a catastrophe. So some of it you have to rein in your brain. And we can go ahead. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Some people like the written word, like they're saying this too will pass, or at this moment all is well, or worry well. It depends. People are so different. Some people hate words. Other people, it's good to say something. It could be a proverb, it could be a prayer, but it's a way of giving your brain and your thoughts a different explanation. So we can go to the next one. So this has to do, people can use their breath to relieve anxiety. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this is called a lazy 8 breath. So some of it is where it says start here. There's a lot of this one. Some people will work with their breath. Other people will just take their finger, stick it where it says start here, and where it says breathe out, you can breathe out. And then you breathe out all the way, and then you breathe in. But it's more like you're finding a way to work with your breath, getting it out of your body in a way. And the next one is the same thing, except there's a star image. So we can go, we can go to the next slide and go past it. Okay. So there are different kinds of breath, which is everything from different breaths you can do when you're panicky, to breath you can do when you feel tight and tense, to breath you do in an emergency versus a breath you might do every day that can, help you relax. So we'll go to the next slide, and we can go to the slide after this. So there's some more examples. If you want to try them, you can always look up a YouTube video. Okay, and then, we can go ahead. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to read you two things and then we can end. So actually, these are the chapters of Alice Hoffman's book. So you can close your eyes or relax if you want, but it's like, and settle down a minute. But you can just think, like, choose your heroes, choose to enjoy yourself, choose your friends, choose your relatives, choose how to spend your time. And it continues. And then, so the next part continues to be like, choose to plan for the future, choose to love who you are, choose to accept sorrow, choose to dream, choose something new, and choose to give in to yourself. And I like, it's like to give in to yourself. And then this is the final chapter she has. Choose love, choose the evidence, choose to make things beautiful, choose to tell your own story, choose to forgive, choose to claim your path, choose to be yourself, choose to share, choose love, choose the evidence. And we can go on. With the Alice Hoffman chapters, that actually it's like a meditation that I've done in groups, a book group or a couple groups, where it's just like it's the idea of you give your brain other messages beside, it's just a way to feed some hope. And then many people now do mindfulness, so we can end. Well, not end. So let's see if we can go a little more. There's some things in here about mindfulness if you want to look at them later. And we can go on to the next slide. And there's different kinds of exercises for mindfulness. And we'll go on. We can go to the next slide. And actually, we're going to end after we do this one, because it really talks about it. Another way of saying something to yourself while you're trying to be more open. So you can take a breath, and it's just remember to be mindful, return to the present moment, recognize what's true, realize that everything changes, release what no longer serves us, recover our balance, regain perspective, replenish, breath, restore, renew. And we probably have like 3 minutes for questions. If they can take a breath. Anything people want to say? Besides, I had too much information, but go ahead.